Hi, welcome to the Agent Odyssey. My name is Matt Wyman. I'm CEO and co-founder of Acario. Acario provides you a simulation and observability platform so you can figure out what your agents are doing before they go to production and make sure to redirect them if they're doing the wrong thing in production. Today, I'm really happy to have Nathan Hugenberger with us. He is a CTO and leader at Known, and he fills a very interesting spot. Nathan, you sit right at the intersection of data and product and marketing for a company that's working with, Fortune 500 brands doing some really innovative marketing. And I would love, maybe you can, before we even dive into all the rest with agents, I'd love to maybe hear a bit about what you're doing because it's a lot of really interesting
Yeah,
innovation in a space that could use some.
absolutely. So, Known is an independent full service agency. We have been deeply rooted in data science and AI from the beginning. And among other things, as CTO, I lead the development of Skeptic, which is our award winning media optimization and automation platform, all built on top of AI. So, Skeptic powers everything we do from a sort of full service and managed service perspective when we're working with media buying clients and creative clients. But our Skeptic apps and our Skeptic agents are also being used directly by in house teams at Fortune 500 companies where they're using it to get higher ROI from their advertising. So that's sort of the lens at which we're approaching this agentic revolution. And that's the kind of world we live in every day.
The lens of a skeptic. By the way, I love that name because
Yeah.
it just says everything about being data oriented.
That's the goal, and I think that it I think applies equally well to the world of AI as it did to the world of data science a number of years ago, right? You really want to be understanding what you can trust and where you have to help it a little bit or ask some questions.
Yeah, it's not a shiny object. It's actually a
Y-
tool. Um,
Indeed.
Maybe we could actually dive in there and say, like, what can Skeptic do? What can some of these agents that you're building, like, what actions can they take in the world?
Yeah. So the agents that we're building and deploying are built on top of the tools and applications within Skeptic, right? So we've been building these capabilities over the past 6 years. And so we have capabilities, more than 60 apps actually, that cover every channel from search and social to television. We cover sort of all aspects of that advertising world and paid media world. And so our agents are essentially exposing those capabilities to users and to other agents, right? And so I think what's interesting in this kind of context is what we're tapping into is not just the power of LLMs, but the power of sort of proven optimization models, proven predictive models, things that you could be using to, increase ROI or increase efficiency or sort of change your media spend and your campaign. And the agents are just basically facilitating the use of those things, right? We're not just throwing
Hmm.
this at ChatGPT and sort of saying, here's what an LLM thinks. We're using the tools to sort of facilitate and unlock the capabilities that have been building and refining over time, right? And obviously, the agents extend what we can do, but we're actually able to, on day one, where we're setting up an agent, come in and say, we've been using this for the past 3 or 4 years, and we've used these tools to unlock hundreds of millions of dollars in increased ROI because that's the sort of tech that we're sitting on top of.
And when you say we, I mean, we're talking about people working with these agents hand in glove, side by side every day, right? I mean, this is not just like fire and forget. This is a constant iterative process.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. So it's not fire and forget from sort of either side of things, right? So in in the world we work in, sort of working with Fortune 500 companies, they're oftentimes spending hundreds of millions of dollars, if not billions of dollars, in paid media. And so the stakes of the decisions, the size of things is huge, right? You're spending more than $1 million a day. So there's a real sort of risk reward thing you want to understand. So when we think about kind of how we deploy these into the wild today, many clients want to make sure their people, their experts, still have an opportunity to be in the loop, be in the review loop to sort of guide what decisions are implemented and not. And so it's something where you're working sort of hand in hand with the agents as the user. But there's also a lot of works, sort of hand in hand on the building side of things, right? Because there's a lot of tuning you end up needing to do to one, make sure that the agent's talking in the language of the customer, it's coming across clear, right? Like not every organization talks the same way. And so we're spending a lot of times, oftentimes, tuning the agents to kind of maximize both interpretability and adoption in the company. So
It also suggests to me that, I mean, here we're talking about a new way of working, right? This is a new fabric of work. People are having these tools that can have some autonomy, that can help, they can help ideate, but I would assume they also can help automate, some of the actions. So, push a button and, you know, suddenly, you've spent how many millions of dollars just because you
exactly.
said go, right? And so how do you help shape that and the automation that goes with it?
Right. So these agents do have the ability to like make changes to the actual campaigns, make changes within the platforms like Google and Meta, all these digital platforms. And whether we're changing budgets or changing the sort of targeting and creative or changing what you're bidding, these are all things that can be changed in real time. Oftentimes the way we sort of think about this is that we're using the agents to analyze and look for opportunities for optimization. So what does the data that we have right now tell us about what we could or should be doing differently? And then there's a review process where, okay, which of those recommendations do we want to act on? And then how do we actually then go transact in traffic and go out to the world and make those changes? And so um, there's both the action on the platform side, there's the actions in the sort of analytics side, and sort of uh, building these analyses. And then, if in most cases, the client wants to sort of sit there and be able to understand at mission control which of these things am I liking? Which of these not? Do I want to do that? Yes, no. And then the agent can go and actually implement.
So it sounds like you're carving out the role of the expert for the human to sit in. Like they have this space of it's their expertise. They are the expert, and the agents are going through and doing this research and pulling this information together and collating different
That's right.
facts and metrics for the expert to review. Which I think is mm, first of all, I think that's what people want, right? They want to continue to have that role, not have everything disappear. But also, I think it's relevant here because often with agents, if you don't have something that can be automated, some task that's repetitive, then it's hard. It's often can be hard to build the agent because I think in many ways agents and autonomy or automation go together. And I'm curious how you think about which parts you want the agents to do and which parts you still want to delegate to the human, and how they express that expertise in that relationship. Like, how do you go through and map that and think about it?
Yeah. So there's a couple of things there. I think one is, for most certainly Fortune 500 companies, they want there to be sort of some final blessing where someone's saying, "Yep, let's actually make all these changes." Whether you think about it as sort of the final review stage, we actually want to present to the user, here's all the things that we're about to change. We're going to make this budget go up. We're going to make that budget go down. We're going to spend less here and spend less there. That's kind of the role in terms of mission control. But what we actually want to do is expose to the user the things that they might not have realized they could be doing, right? So many times today, their life is a nonstop set of sort of manual tasks and meetings and sort of in some cases a lot of manual work. We're not just automating that. We're actually unlocking capabilities that they didn't quite understand were there before. So if we're able to comb through all the data every single morning and look for every unturned stone and turn it over and find those missed opportunities, that wasn't something they were doing before, right? So in some ways, that expert also becomes sort of the hero ideally, because what ideally is happening is the agent's coming to them, and while they're sipping their morning coffee, it's saying, "Hey, I just ran a bunch of analyses and look what I just found. Do you like these? Would you like to implement them?" And then you're saying, "Yes, let's go with these." But but that wasn't happening before. And so actually what oftentimes is happening is people are seeing not just a productivity gain or a labor savings, but actually a real unlock in terms of ROI, in terms of additional revenue, because we're spending the money smarter. We're spending those hundreds of millions of dollars in advertising in a more productive, more performant way, because the agent is essentially multiplicatively giving us those powers, right?
That's fascinating. Instead of having the agent just automate what's already known, the agent is able to come back and synthesize, hey, there's a pattern you're not seeing.
Yes.
Here's the pattern, and then let the person decide. Have you found that that's made it easier on adoption?
100%. And I think when we come in and sort of do an initial diagnostic around the workflows and the opportunity, one big component of that is helping people understand that missed opportunity, that sort of what they're not seeing today, and putting in place both the business case for doing this rollout, but also the measurement systems and the observation systems to sort of ensure they can see that they're getting it. But it is big because if you think about it, most Fortune 500 companies, like, they're spending hundreds of millions on advertising. They're probably only spending a tenth of that on actual labor managing it, right? So there's a,
Hmm.
a 10x difference between their media spend and their media labor costs. And the reality is that advertising is driving 3 or 4 times that in revenue. So there could be a 40 or 30 times difference between how much they could save on labor efficiency versus how much they could drive in terms of additional revenue if they were to unlock these additional optimizations. And so that, as you can imagine, tends to pay for these things very quickly, right? Like, because you're talking about, a few extra percent on $500 million is actually a lot. And so um, it's that really kind of is at the forefront of both the CMO or the CFO or the CTO's thinking when they're understanding what an agent solution can do for them.
I think the I can see how the C-suite would lean into that,
Yeah.
but I guess I always worry about the folks who actually are on the ground as well with adoption, because you don't want it to be like, you don't want the equivalent of an organ rejection, right? Where it
Yes.
makes all the sense in the world, but the experience of using it actually is either uncomfortable, or the trust isn't there, or it sort of bounces out of the organization. So how have you thought about the literally the straightforward user, not the buyer, not the economic, value prop, but the person who's actually there working with it every day? How have you tried to make it easy for them to adopt?
Yeah, well, and so the advantage there is that that's essentially who we are, right? Like, our agents are built on top of this platform that was built for those people. We are those people when we're sort of functioning as a media buying agency. And so what we're oftentimes doing is actually coming in and starting with that team, and starting by helping them understand what the tools can do for them, what visibility and control they have. And really, oftentimes we are adding capabilities that are essentially entirely focused on figuring out what's the additional pain points, what's the additional sort of workflow process in their organization that they spend way too much time on, and
Mm.
add that into the capability. So you start sort of from that center of excellence out to make sure that the people who are currently managing this paid media understand and are sort of the heroes of the adoption, as opposed to having this happen to them, right?
It's a huge advantage. Essentially, you can dog food, essentially build for yourselves in some respects, and then multiply it out into the world, because you know that, okay, these peers, yes, they have to be customers, but they're essentially our peers. They're doing a very similar task for a similar
Yes.
purpose, and therefore they can pick it up and carry it forward. Do, but there are all sorts of nuances that could start getting in your way, like permissions and what are you allowed to do, what are you not allowed to do. Your organization might have a little bit more of a collegial environment. Others might be more hierarchical. How are you thinking about that?
Yeah, it's a great point, and I think that this is something that we see that tech organizations and clients have to really start thinking through as they really start getting into understanding what rolling out agentic solutions, especially for paid media, but in general, what this involves. Because the agents have really given you new capabilities. Oftentimes they're democratizing access to information and access to analysis in a way that wasn't possible before, right? So, you know if you were just to go ask the IT organization, hey, let's set up SSO, and now we'll see all the permissions to what data sets those people have. In practice, they might have had permission to the data set, but if it was impossible to go answer this question before, they haven't really answered for themselves whether they're comfortable giving that power to everyone, right? And because what we're oftentimes doing in these optimization analyses is identifying what more you still could be doing, there's always this question of, well, who's got the understanding of how to interpret those results, who's an expert and maybe not an expert in the organization. And um, ultimately, what this ends up meaning is you want to really think through what kinds of questions and what kinds of capabilities you want to deploy democratically, what you want to sort of only give to experts. And oftentimes that ends up looking like a kind of functionality where, the agent might function as a middleman and a broker in that interaction where it's saying, I'm seeing an opportunity. You might want to go ask your expert whether that's a good idea. So that we're not really sort of ultimately using the agent as, what you might think of as like a political hot potato or grading system, but rather something that's sort of unlocking and sort of raising all the boats, right?
Yeah, it's interesting because also the access to the root information or data necessary to perform the analysis, the user might have rights to the analysis, but not to the core data. And if you're going to actually find new patterns, as we were talking about before, you want to provide as much access as possible in terms of the patterning to determine what's happening. And then there's an abstraction there to, what's actually shown. But could that also lead you down some difficult roads in terms of the, if the drive is cost efficiency, right? And you're trying to improve the marketing campaign performance, like how do you start, like, how, on the one hand, it's a standard marketing question, right? It doesn't have
Yeah,
nothing to
yeah.
do with agents. Like, how do you balance these two
Yes.
things? But when you hyper optimize and you start to move the loop faster and you start to make decisions faster and the patterns are more prevalent, does it change how you start thinking about those trade-offs in terms of efficiency versus performance and cost, et cetera?
Yeah, I mean, I think over time it will certainly change how people think about those trade-offs. I think you're also just highlighting one of the many reasons why people are the experts, right? Like, because those trade-offs and those decisions live inside a context that might not have been stored in the data set or in the database, right? Like, what's the new strategic priority? What did the CEO just say as our new pivot, right? Those things are probably something that the marketers are super focused on and want to be investing in, but they might not look like the highest performing best ideas on day one or day 30 or day 100. That's one of the reasons why the data might be telling you one thing, but the strategy is something a little different. And that's where the expert working with the agent can actually get you to the right outcome. That's otherwise hard for the agent to do on its own because it wasn't in the meeting last week, right? Like, at
Yeah.
least not yet. So,
Yeah, in general, yeah,
yeah,
it could happen.
it could
This is
happen.
interesting because a lot of what we've been talking about to me sounds like campaign management. It's sort of the strategic side of marketing. But if I understood correctly earlier, you're also looking at using AI in the creative side as well. And there's a definite tie between the two. Can you maybe describe to us a little bit of like what kinds of things you're doing to bring those two to bridge the gap?
Yeah, absolutely. So, um, there's a lot of opportunities there, and there's a lot of ways. Obviously, AI is being used uh, in creative and in media. One of the things that we're really focused in on is using AI and agents to kind of superpower the creative optimization cycle. So,
Hmm.
understanding in real time how are how are the different creative assets performing? What does that sort of indicate we might want to do differently going forward, either in terms of differing how much we're investing in different assets or new assets. And so that feedback loop can happen at extremely rapid pace with the power of an agent, right? We can be doing that all day long and surfacing insights around this message is working, this imagery is working, that's something you should do differently. And that's just something that wasn't really possible before. And obviously now we also have all these tools that can help us create the creative. So now you can be thinking about creative sort of variation and creative production getting powered by agentic insights that are being constantly fed to the system because we are looking at the real-time performance of the media as a sort of signal on what creative's resonating better than other creative. Right?
Does that mean that the folks who are actually working on the creative, whether it's an image, the video, whatever the specific elements are, does that mean they're getting more insight into how their past work is now performing? And You're
Yeah.
nodding yes, so I'm going to assume yes,
Yeah.
but I'm
Yeah.
going to overload
100%.
this. Yeah.
Yeah, 100%. So that is essentially what this looks like, in its best instantiation. You've got the creative team who are using AI tools to produce at scale efficiently, but they are being fed insights that aren't just deterministic and aren't just prescriptive. They're also insights that cause brainstorming and cause ideation and cause you to think, what new things should we be doing? Right? This is not all science.
Possible.
There's art here too, but like, certainly we see this inside Known, where our creative team is sort of hungry for those nuggets because those nuggets are the gem of an idea for the next thing, right? Like, what are we making next? And so, just like there's sort of a partnership between the media experts and the sort of media optimization agents, there's a partnership between the creative team and the creative insights agents.
Does that, I mean, this is speculation, but does that mean that some of those measures we were talking about a moment ago, in terms of essentially the invested effort to the quote unquote efficiency and performance of it, the balance might start to shift a little bit, and there's more interest or willingness to spend more time on the ideation because you're essentially getting a broader range of possibilities? Like how's the team think about that?
Yeah, I think it does. And I get maybe one way that shows up is when you've got what is essentially kind of a rapidly learning system we've described, right? That actually in practice, what I see is it gets people more excited about trying new and different ideas, right? They actually kind of
Hmm,
end up exploring different paths, different messages, different creative schemes more because the confidence that you'll see what's working actually kind of gives you permission to be more creative, right? You don't have to just leave the room with consensus that this is the safest bet. You can actually go in there and say, well, what if we go north, east, west, and south and learn what's gonna pop, right?
that's
So it actually is
interesting.
kind of interesting.
That's, I mean, I'm also hearing a bit of it shifts from being thinking of agents as a reactive source, like it's reacting to the data and therefore, data says this, therefore I do that, to a more proactive. At least that's what I'm hearing. Is like, okay, well, let's run a thought experiment. Let's think about other ways of looking at it. And I think that that's interesting because it addresses a concern that I've heard many times expressed, which is that because of agents, everything reaches some sort of gray middle ground where you get the average of everything. And I think that the if you're turning this loop, there seems to be this opportunity to turn that. Have you had to take specific action so as to create that uh, variability or creativity, or to make it more available?
Uh, yeah, and I think that that's kind of wired into our DNA as an organization. Like because we're so rooted in data science and AI, we've always sort of approached creative exercises and media exercises as fundamentally learning exercises. And you want a learning agenda that has actual differences in it, right? Testing a bunch of different things that no one could tell the difference, from 5 feet away doesn't really tell you anything. And so um, this does end up meaning that you can benefit from more variability and can benefit from sort of more, heterogeneous testing for sure. Mm, And I think that that's something that, different organizations will adapt to that faster or slower, just depending on the culture, right? And just kind of how much they embrace experimentation as an organization. But what the agents can do is two things. One, make sure that feedback and learning loop is happening, at speed, high velocity, accurately, but they can also be, sort of fodder in the ideation process themselves. We've all had that interaction with agents where it's helping you think through a problem, it's throwing out ideas like that. That's a very much a part of this too.
That's fascinating. A lot of people who are building agents are thinking about those agents automating existing tasks, but you're flipping it around and you're imagining this a whole different work environment where the agents are actually helping you explore new things. So as a person who's responsible on the product side and the build side, how are you figuring out with your organization, well, what's the next? What should we be focused on next? Because if you're not focused on automation and just making it faster, which is what it sounds like you're getting huge benefit out of stretching the organization. How do you go find that next area to push on?
Right, right. So one way we think about this is kind of in sort of optimization facilitation, right? It is really sort of thinking about We talked about that huge difference between the labor going into managing the media versus the revenue coming out. How do we make sure that what we're primarily focused on, right, at least 10 times more than just the automation of manual tasks, is making sure we're always spotting those opportunities to move the big needle and move the revenue and present those to the user, right? Make it insanely easy to do that, right? So in some ways that can be, complex models and sophisticated analytics. In some cases, it's actually super simple, which is if your agent can answer the question, how do we make more revenue without spending any more? Well, why don't we make that also something you can schedule to show up on your desk every morning, right? Because like, why wouldn't you want to press that button every day? So it's both those things and then understanding having actually been a part of rolling these systems out. What does the management team want to see? What kinds of observability do they want? Not just to, uptime and hallucination rates and all the sort of LLM kind of metrics, but also in terms of impact, because we just talked about the fact that that impact might be both measurable and large, right?
Uh, wh- I don't usually bring Ocario into this, but actually that's something that we're seeing as well. People are realizing it's not just about the functional issues, it's about the business outcomes. And more we're trying to think of observability in terms of business outcomes. And I think that's a fascinating change because it's way more grounded. And I think it answers questions that as technologists, we're always trying to be relevant to the business. And it helps land those answers a lot more easily. Um, as you're imagining this changing workforce, because it's essentially what you're doing. What you're describing is bringing these coworkers into this workforce who are going to help ideate. They're going to help find new patterns, but you're not ejecting, you're introducing. So, I mean, are there skill sets that you're seeing as the mandatory skills or the beneficial skills to adapt to this new workforce? What do you think people need to do to be more ready for it?
100%. I think there are two things that I think about a lot. One is what you might call wisdom, which is essentially thinking about what does the AI not know? Because for you to
Hmm.
play the best role as the expert, oftentimes I think it means you're just thinking about what doesn't it know, right? And I think that's something that is really easy for people to sort of think about and do, especially if they're kind of new to working with agents. And it's never going to go out of style. It's always going to be a useful question. It's a little bit it's the skeptical part, right, of this whole thing to kind of turn that phrase. So I think that's one thing that people should definitely be embracing as like their role in the process. But the other thing I think relates to the kind of the opportunities we were talking about, and maybe the idea there is a little bit of ambition. It's like, well, how do you not settle for automating the current outcome, right? Because automating the current outcome means, yeah, less effort went into it, but you didn't get anywhere different, right? And so, like, how do we think about like unlocking more is gonna, I think, serve us all well.
I think you're also in a unique situation because a part of wanting to be in the known ecosystem is because you want to push a boundary. You want to try something new and push to the outside. Do you find that some folks have you found resistance? Has there been some sort of, what's the sentiment been around this?
Yeah, I mean, I think so. We've seen it from multiple angles, right? We see it in now agents. We saw it before in the power of generative AI for creative, right? And I think there is definitely a different set of reactions. I think the people who uh, fare the best are people who are always sort of conscious of the role they play as sort of arbiter and tastemaker, and so the insight they bring in that wisdom role. Um, but but I think there is this excitement if you start thinking about, well, what can I do that I couldn't do before, right? Like,
Yeah.
what could I like? If you're an engineer, what could I build this afternoon that I could have never made happen in months before, right? Like, if you get excited about that, then it's, I think, pretty exciting overall. Um, and I think seeing that maybe is what the inspiration is to bring everyone along on that journey.
And you're making them experts. And seriously, I think that's a big thing. You're giving people a very clear role and ownership, and I think it's appropriate.
Yeah, I think it is just even thinking about it as being experts in the loop versus humans in the loop, like fundamentally changes the framing for not just the people who are doing it, but I actually think importantly for the technologists and the executives who are overseeing these implementations, right? If you're just thinking about them as humans, you're misunderstanding probably ultimately the value they're going to add.
Yeah, you're suddenly thinking of it as like these automatons that just push a yes
Yeah.
or a no, like yes, keep
Yeah.
going, or no, don't, which is
Yeah.
not at all where, to your point, it's not where the
Totally.
value comes from. And I love the wisdom as the angle, because wisdom implies that there's a thoughtfulness, that there's some reflection about what's happening, and there's something to offer there. Nathan, thank you so much today. It was a great conversation.
Thank you for having me. I enjoyed it.